From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. It's one of the biggest issues we hear about during election season and tends to become a stand-in for the overall well-being of our country, the economy. But the economy is not just one thing. It's the stock market, interest rates, inflation, the national debt. And if your eyes just glazed over a little, today's conversation is for you. Today, we're demystifying the economy and breaking down all the basics with an expert. Jason Bailey is the founder and executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. He's a researcher, public speaker, and advocate focused on fiscal and economic issues in Kentucky. He has served on state commissions addressing tax reform and retirement funding and holds a master's in public administration with a specialization in public finance from New York University, as well as a bachelor's degree from Carson Newman College. Jason, welcome to On Track.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is the stock market and how does it work?
Yeah, so the stock market involves what are called publicly traded companies. So that's corporations that are large enough that they issue stock, and stock is basically an ownership share of a company. When companies get a certain size, so they can access more capital, more money for investments, they will go public, as it's called, and will issue shares. They're then purchased by wealthy investors or pension funds or large investment funds that then own those shares, and they're worth a certain amount of money. And the amount of money they're worth depends on a lot of things, but it's primarily a bet on the future profitability of that company. Because once you own that share, that stock, you have the right to what are called dividends, which are just a share of the profits that a company makes will come to you in the form of income, cash. And then you also can make money or lose money by selling that stock. So if it's worth a certain amount, $30 a share, and it goes up to $50 a share. If you sell it, you've made $20. So it is essentially a way in which, in our market capitalist economy, ownership can be divided up among a larger share of both large wealthy people and collectively, the retirement savings and other savings of individuals.
Is it also, you're talking about large investors, retirement, but it's also individuals, right, who can participate in the stock market?
Individuals can. Obviously, it's really skewed who has the extra resources to do that, right? I mean, you're talking about a very small percentage of the people who individually own a huge share of the stocks. But there are people who play in it a little bit or have some extra resources they will put into purchasing, an index fund, or which is just like a collection of different stocks or that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to retire nowadays in the United States, most people have what are called defined contribution plans, and even those who have traditional pension plans, that money is mostly in the stock market.
Right. Well, so a lot of people I hear use the economy and the stock market interchangeably, but what's the difference really between the two?
Yeah, there's a big difference between the two. The stock market and what we hear, we often hear the reports about things like the Dow Jones and the S&P 500. Those are just basically ways to aggregate the value of stocks to tell you if they're going up or going down in general. But the stock market is really a measure of how profitable companies are and how profitable we expect them to be. But that's not the totality of the economy, of course. Profits are something that corporations or companies earn. It's not something that everyday people get. So it's an insufficient measure of the economy. If you can have a really good stock market, but a really lousy economy for everyday folks. So there are a lot of other different measures you want to look at. But when you look at it, at the economy as a whole and think about it abstractly, I mean, essentially it is the production and trade of goods and services. It's all the things that we do, outside of our household, although you could argue that your household labor is also part of the economy. But in terms of things that are bought and sold, that happens largely, not entirely, through markets in the U.S. economy. And, all those goods and services are produced and sold. So that's the jobs that most of us have that we're paid a wage to do. And if you want to look at the health of the economy, you have to look at things like unemployment. You have to look at things like wages, and the poverty rate, other things that tell you not just how the wealthiest corporations are doing, but how everyday folks are getting along.
So the economy is like the giant umbrella of all of the trade, not just the market. So how would you explain it? I guess I know you sort of have, but in the most simplest terms, what is the economy?
Well, it's essentially what we do together to provide for needs and wants as a society. And the economy is in some cases global now. So things that used to happen more locally, you may buy something obviously that's purchased in a country on the other side of the world. So an economy is how we work together to get the things we have and the things we want. So whether that's an iPhone or it's vegetables to eat for dinner, and so there are different systems that organize that in different ways. We mostly have a market economy, but we also have public services, which are paid for through taxes that provide some of the things that we want and need, like schools, like libraries, like roads. The U.S. Mail is not a private business; it's a public company, right? So we have a mixed economy in a lot of ways. But the economy is the work we do together, and how it contributes to our well-being.
So what are the biggest forces? You've touched on some of this. The biggest forces and decisions that really shape the economy for us.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot, but government rules and government policies and government spending really does underlie the economy as a whole. Even though we're a capitalist economy here in the United States, we're mostly a market economy. There is no such thing as a free market. That all businesses act within the playing field that's laid out by government. So the decisions that are made in Washington, that are made in Frankfurt, even on the local level, are really important, and that includes things like how much the government spends and how much it taxes and how it taxes. That's what's sometimes called fiscal policy. So that determines taxes take money out of the economy, spending puts the money back into the economy, but for what and how much? So that's a big indicator. There's also often a deficit, and we run a deficit economy these days. So how much we spend more than we bring in taxes, and that plays a role. Then you have kind of fiscal policy, taxes and spending, and then the other big policy anchor is the monetary system, which gets even more obscure. But essentially, we have a central bank called the Federal Reserve that determines, in essence, the terms on which money is traded, how much money there is in the economy, what interest rates are out there. So when you need to borrow, whether you're an individual or business, what are you going to have to pay in terms of interest rates? And they and Congress, who manages the fiscal policy, essentially decide through that what the condition of the economy is, in combination with what private actors do. So that through the totality of those decisions, that helps determine how many people are employed, what their wages are, how much inflation is at any point in time, and any of the other indicators that go into understanding the state of the economy.
I want to get into the Fed a little later on, but before we get there, I'm still at the beginning. I'm curious what the relationship is between the stock market and the economy.
Yeah, when the stock market is going up, that means that investors have confidence in the future of the economy. Essentially, a stock price is a bet on the future of the profitability of a company. And so in its totality, you're looking at it going up. That means that the investment world believes that the economy is going to get stronger. It's sometimes thought that the stock market puts money into businesses. That's not necessarily true. A lot of businesses, when they want to invest on build a new factory, they will actually borrow money. They won't take money from their investors, their equity, their owners. It's more of a bet on against other investors about how good a company is going to do. So it's related. But increasingly the stock markets, the financial markets as a whole have gotten so big and more disconnected from the everyday economy, and such that it's almost a little bit like a casino. I mean, there's a lot of gambling that goes on in the stock market. There are stocks like Tesla that have been really, really high, even though the company itself hasn't been doing that well. It's really distinct, and you can't just look at the stock market and say, things are necessarily good just because it's going up. Now, when the stock market tanks, that often reflects that there are big problems in the underlying economy.
Yeah, I was curious about that. Like, is that an indication of a downturn or maybe even a recession when the stock market tanks?
It's very likely, at least, or it could be, in the case of 2008, during the Great Recession, we had a financial crisis where banks were over-leveraged in their debt on housing, and there were a lot of bad loans made, and there were bets against those bad loans, and it was kind of a on and on, so sort of stacked up debt on top of debt, and it all came crumbling down. Stock market collapsed. And in that case, the collapse of the stock market and the financial markets caused the recession in the economy, as opposed to the other way around, which is what you're saying. So in that case, the stock market was actually caused the recession, as opposed to just reflecting the recession. The financial markets are so big now, I got to tell you that, they really drive a lot of what happens. And in 2001, we had another recession that was caused by a bust in what's called the dot-coms. That was the beginning of the internet, and all these companies were created, pets.com and things that were selling stuff over the internet that was never going to be a viable business model. And the bubble burst and the economy went into a recession. So as often as not, it works in that direction these days.
So, and I'm just curious, I know we've talked about some factors in the downturns of the stock market falling, and just talking about the rise and fall itself, in general terms, what does influence the rise and fall of the stock market?
Well, there's a term an economist came up with once called irrational exuberance that can sometimes drive the rise of the stock market. So there's sort of a herd mentality sometimes with the stock market. It's not, I think there are rational decisions sometimes being made based on tons and tons of data that these, investors are making. But there can be bubbles that are created that where, folks are sort of riding the wave and of prices going up and hoping that they just keep going up until in some cases there's really not a viable business underlying that particular stock or that sector, and the bubble bursts and things go back down. So There is some of that kind of psychology that drives the stock market, but at the same time, there's also an element to which the strength of the overall economy. So the extent to which we have innovation in the economy. We have new sectors that are developed that are generating new goods and services, or figuring out ways to do things more productively than they've been done in the past. That can increase corporate profits, and when those profits go up, it can increase the stock market. So the underlying economy could also be getting healthier, and that can help make the stock market rise. But the converse is also true there. Where if we're not getting more productive, if we've reached the limits of productivity increases, if new technology is not being developed as rapidly as it once did, then you will also see the stock market and other indicators of economic well-being not going up like you'd like to do.
Yeah, so it's a reflection of what's happening in the world, whether it's innovation, also history. It sounds like many different factors that go into the rise and fall of the stock market. So I kind of want to return back to what you were talking about with the Fed. And if you could say again what the Fed's role is. And I know interest rates is the thing that we talk about most with the Fed. How do they decide what those interest rates should be?
Yeah, so the Fed, was created over 100 years ago. And before we had the Fed, we had enormous booms and busts in the financial market and in the monetary system in general. We had bank runs that would, where a bank would, not run out of the deposits it needed to cover the money it needed to cover deposits, and would close and cause all these panics. So the Fed was created to sort of create stability within the financial system. And it has really two mandates by law. One is to try to maintain full employment, which means that everybody who wants a job can find a job. And the second is to maintain a stable price system, stable prices, meaning inflation that doesn't go out of control. And so those are really the two indicators and the two mandates that the Fed is looking at when they meet and they decide about interest rates. So if they meet and they decide that inflation is rising too much and they're worried about it accelerating, they will raise interest rates to try to slow down the economy. That slows down the economy because it becomes more expensive to borrow. Maybe you're less likely to take out a mortgage to build a house, or a business is less likely to open a new branch plant because the interest rates are up. So it slows the economy, maybe bringing prices back down. On the flip side, if inflation is stabilized and unemployment is too high or unemployment is rising, you will see the Fed do the exact opposite. They'll cut interest rates because what they want to do is stimulate additional economic activity. There's room for them to do that without causing inflation and put people back to work. So that the mandates are often sometimes conflicting, and that creates an uncertainty about what the Fed does with interest rates.
Thank you, Jason. We'll be back with more in a moment. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. We're breaking down the basics with a Stock Market 101 conversation with Jason Bailey, the founder and executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. Now, Jason, lately I've heard the market described as volatile or unpredictable. Is the market really that unstable right now? And if so, what is causing this?
Well, there's a lot of volatility in the stock market right now and in the economy in general. And, I think it's really driven by policy and uncertainty about policy. So you have a lot of things happening since the Trump administration started that, like imposing tariffs on other countries, also imposing them and then rolling them back a few days later, sort of some back and forth on that. There's also huge legislation around the budget, programs like Medicaid and SNAP that affect millions and millions of Americans. Those have economic implications when there's potentially less money going into healthcare or going into food. That affects the overall economy. And then the taxes as well, the tax part of that plan. So what are taxes going to look like going forward? Who's going to pay less? Who might pay more? All those things are really up in the air right now. The president is pursuing a pretty radical and I think many people would say, uncertain agenda in the sense of like it doesn't seem to stick anywhere for very long. And uncertainty is the worst thing for financial market because it freezes people up. Like a business is not going to invest if they're not sure where things are going to look like in a couple of years. And so it's that uncertainty as much as the policies themselves that is causing volatility. And it's also causing consumers to hold back. They question whether they should make that big purchase, buy that new car, buy that, new piece of furniture, because they don't know where things are going to go. And when everybody holds back their spending and their investing, it can slow the economy down and create that volatility and fear.
So is that effectively what we're seeing then? The markets are sort of volatile. They're going up, they're going down. People are sort of hesitant. And so it's slowing economics down. So I'm wondering, like thinking about all those pieces, how do they actually show up in the lives of everyday people, especially here in Kentucky?
Well, lots of ways. I mean, ultimately, the decisions about tariffs, for example, deeply affect the prices that people pay when they go to the grocery store each week, when they purchase basic household needs, whether that's diapers or other essentials. So the tariffs really will affect. We've already had some problems the last few years with inflation. So the prices of goods and services are a major issue. Also, when we get into things like a potential trade war with other countries, it can affect jobs here in Kentucky. If other countries are boycotting bourbon and there are 25,000 Kentuckians who work in the bourbon industry, that can be a problem for that industry. And then when you talk about the whole budget and tax system, there are things like Medicaid that really prop up a lot of hospitals, especially in rural areas of Kentucky, that provide health care to 1 in 3 Kentuckians, kids, seniors, people with disabilities, low-wage workers. So their ability to have health care is also, part of the conversation in Washington. So tons of ways in which programs and that government is determining affect people's lives, and they affect the economy by how much money is sort of circulating through.
So real ways they're touching people in this way. I'm just looking forward. What kind of policies do you think would really benefit Kentucky's economy and help folks across the state build stability and opportunity?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I think are important. I mean, job quality has been an issue for decades here in Kentucky, where there's so many jobs that don't pay what you might call a living wage. We haven't had a minimum wage increase for the longest time in history. Now it was 2009 the last time. So there are a lot of low-wage jobs that could use a boost, and they're increasingly, Kentuckians work in the service sector, where jobs tend to be lower. There are places that need job creation. I'm thinking particularly of Eastern Kentucky, which has lost so much employment in coal. Other parts of the state that have lost manufacturing. They need public investment to help create jobs in places where there are jobs. There's also, the cost issues that families face. Things like housing. There's a shortage of about more than 200,000 houses in Kentucky. And so that affects the price of rent. It affects the price of mortgages. It's pricing people out of housing security in general, but certainly being able to afford that, rising homelessness levels. So things like housing, healthcare, childcare, the price of college, a lot of the things that people buy have become more expensive, and the wages that they receive through their work have not kept up. So that pinch is probably, in my mind, the biggest issue just facing the economic well-being of the majority of Kentucky families.
So I know we are touching on this piece by piece, but just to make it clear, for those who aren't investors in the stock market, how do market shifts affect their daily lives?
Yeah, in terms of the stock market, I mean, I think for everyday folks who aren't investors, the biggest way in which their resources would be in the stock market would be through a retirement account, largely. So I will say, most Kentuckians don't have very much at all in a retirement account, not nearly as much as what they might need. So even those who do don't tend to have much. But, obviously, there's those tend to be heavily invested in the stock market. And so the extent to which the market is doing well over time will determine how much you have at the end of the day when it's time to draw that down. So that's probably the biggest way in which most people interact with the stock market. There are some people who have, student loan student savings accounts for their kids' college that's invested in the stock market or other things, but those are pretty small in Kentucky compared to what people are putting in for retirement. So, that's really the main thing. But again, the other issue is that if we have a financial crisis like we had in 2008, that affects the economy as a whole. So it doesn't just affect the prices on the stock market or the value of your retirement portfolio. It affects whether you have a job or at all. And we lost a lot of jobs in 2008, and it took a very long time until we recovered what we had lost.
How long did it take? Just curious.
Most of a decade. And, that was an issue where, the economy really needed a very strong stimulus, and we didn't really get one. We got a stimulus, but it wasn't big enough. And so we kind of crawled along, and the pieces eventually come back together. But it was essentially about the time that the first Trump administration came into office that we had more or less recovered the ground that we lost. But you're talking 8 years.
Well, before I let you go, what resources does the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy offer to help people understand and engage with the economy?
Yeah. So, we have a website, kypolicy.org, and we produce research all the time about big policy issues. For example, the debates going on in Washington about tariffs or about the budget, or in Frankfurt about the tax system, or the rules underlying work and jobs and healthcare and things of that nature. So folks can visit there. They can sign up for our email list and follow us on social media.
Jason, thank you so much for being here on Track.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Jason Bailey is the founder and executive director of the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. He's a researcher, public speaker, and advocate focused on fiscal and economic issues in Kentucky. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, being kind is free, a solid return for community. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.
You set the gold standard for your business. Your website should do the same. Wix puts you at the helm, so you can enjoy the creative freedom of designing your site just the way you want. Want someone to bounce your ideas off? Talk with AI to create a beautiful site together. Whatever your business, manage it from one place and tie it all together with a personalized domain name. Gear up for success with a brand that says you best. You can do it yourself on Wix.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.